Hello, welcome. My name's Christy Bolingbroke. I'm the Executive Artistic Director for the National Center for Choreography at the University of Akron. And we're so delighted that you've joined us for the latest in the virtual artist talk series with GroundWorks Dance Theater. And tonight I am pleased to welcome Sidra Bell. Hey, Sidra.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I'm so glad that we get this opportunity to reconnect. Our paths crossed a decade ago in San Francisco, and that's actually where I'd like to start our conversation because I love this part of your bio that identifies first you're the founder of Sidra Bell Dance New York, and that was established in 2001, identifying as a dancer, choreographer, and educator both as a master lecturer at the University of Arts in Philadelphia, an adjunct professor at Lines Ballet and Dominican University, that's in San Francisco in California, and an adjunct professor at Ball State University in Indiana. Now, NCC Akron likes to work with national artists, but I'm really curious how you can hold all those positions in so many different places. Talk to us a little bit about how you navigate dance academia.
The academic sphere has been a really important place for me to develop my choreographic language and voice. I've developed these partnerships over 20 years with various institutions, primarily University of the Arts, which was a changing program about 12 years ago. And under the guidance of Donna Faye Birchfield, I started to develop this course that was centered in improvisation. And it's a sophomore coaching class. And I sort of leverage that experience to talk to other university platforms about what does it feel like to have a choreographer that's a living choreographer working and traveling, having some of my company members teach alongside me in this sort of modular framework. And over the past decade, working through UArts and then pitching this idea, it's really worked out to have a flexible format where I'm teaching, but I also am able to give my company artists and collaborators an opportunity to teach alongside me and throughout the semester. So wherever I am, something else is simultaneously happening. I was traveling a lot this past few months, for instance, and my rehearsal director, Kimmy Parker, was at University of Michigan finishing up a piece and putting it on stage. And I've just been very lucky that institutions for dance and theater have understood that it's very necessary for me to be in the field and to be able to bring that back to their students. And Ball State University is another place that's brought me in and the company in various capacities, whether it's doing an installation or a formal concert piece or bringing the company out to work through National Dance Project and be on their stage at Emmons Auditorium. And that's just continued to grow. I'm at Harvard University this semester, and I'm there on and off throughout the semester and also working in hybridity. So it's a changing landscape, and I think institutions are starting to figure out that artists need to be continuously in their craft to then bring that back to the community, as well as having their foundational technique classes.
I love hearing that in these sort of updates from the field. And you talked a little bit about, you might workshop some ideas as part of your teaching. Not every artist is a teacher, not every teacher is a choreographer. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more like what is a class or a workshop with you? You mentioned improvisation, but these terms can mean so many different things. And if you have a technique or a certain ethos that you offer when
Yeah.
you're working with students.
I feel like I've been teaching for as long as I've been, really within the field of making. I have to root my teaching back to when I was a student at the Alvin Ailey School as a scholarship student. We had to work exchange, and they actually put me into a first steps class where I was assistant teaching. So that was
Oh,
at age like 15, 16 years old. And I feel like I understood from a very early age that that was one of my gifts, that I could share and communicate the language of dance. And I feel like that's really serviced me in multiple ways, whether it's building up choreographic ideas or being able to mentor students, um, working with upcoming choreographers. And um, it feels like there's a methodology, but that it's flexible and always in dialogue. And is why I sort of think of foundation as being the kind of center of it, is that it's always in dialogue with what's happening, whether that's physically what's happening in the room or bouncing ideas off student or collaborator and receiving that. It feels very circular to me. I've also always thought of it as circular learning. I've, as growing up again, I was in a Montessori school growing up, and so those practices really impacted the way I thought about how the room should feel, that we would always be in a circle and making and kind of, using call and response. And there's elements of jazz. I have a father that's a jazz musician, and I always feel like that's at the root too. And when I look at like a studio practice, it feels like everyone's kind of devising and putting into the center of the room and making. And I do host a improvisational laboratory twice a year in New York City, which kind of compounded all those experiences into a very nuclear environment. And that has attracted over 500 artists in 6 years, twice a year at Center for Performance Research. And module laboratory really is about making and improvising and intergenerational artists coming in, whether they be actors, dancers, somatic practitioners, doulas. It's been really wonderful to create an actual space where the methodology exists in a really vibrant way, as well as bringing it out to different institutions all over the world. So it feels like a methodology that's always changing and evolving. And as I change and evolve and learn my body more and more.
I love that you brought up module. I was going to ask, like, if you could tell us about that. And it sounds like it's an alternate or an extension of your work inside academic institutions. But you're like, wait, we never stop learning. You're still in dialogue with your body. You're still figuring something out, and the connections and creating that space, not just for dancers and choreographers, but doulas, everyone who can be a part of the support system. And
it's
in
definitely
the circle.
It's definitely a passion project. It started in 2015, sort of out of a need to find dancers. I had been teaching, over 10 years in New York, and I had a shifting company at the time, and I just didn't know how to make a process that felt organic to what had been built in the company nonprofit, what I needed from dancers in the studio. So I decided to host a workshop, which felt easy enough to like harness all the teaching experiences I had had and just to rent a space and see dancers. And that was the intention. But then we came away from that 6 days. I was like, no, it wasn't about that at all. It was about what happened in the room. Like we were laughing and it was non-competitive, and the dancers and artists that came were actually truly from all sectors of the field, some that were later on in their path and maybe wanted to think about collaborating in a different way. Some were still in academia, and it sort of created this trajectory for the project that kind of set the tone for non-competitive workspace, kind of a no frills, bare bones process where we're just playing and working and dialoguing. I always joke that the first year was just a boombox and me. And I tried to keep it very, very low infrastructure because it sort of takes away that kind of institutional lens and allows for people to feel really comfortable being there. And it's been really thrilling to develop. I'd like to develop it further into possible certification and maybe offering tuition free at some point, because I think it's a really important thing to be able to offer mid-career performing artists or people that don't identify as dancers but just want to be in a space and move in safely guided ways.
I also just loving the spirit and the image. I mean, you in a boombox took me right back to my preteen self in a boombox, making up dances in your living room, and for the joy of it, right? Like just to find that, because sometimes as we become, more and more professional, you need to have the ability to also be in dialogue with why you do this in the first place. And the space.
And that's why I bring up the laughter. Like that was what struck me most, is that I was going through a very transitional time where I was needing to like find another crew of collaborators. And I just remember like one of the sessions just bursting out into laughter, which I'm pretty like stoic most of the time. I just felt this joy like emitting out of me through the process. And yeah, it just felt so necessary and continues to feel very necessary for me and for the community. And what I've loved in recent years is that we've actually kind of fostered this idea of professional fellows at the modules that are kind of already practitioners, and they might guide a session or be doing mentorship work with me, or even some of them have been more interested in filming or doing something in a creative like container for the project, or even DJing, or making music in the room. So it's really turned into this like interdisciplinary thing. Yeah, twice a year. The next one's in June 2023.
Okay.
CPR has been a great partner. I'm on the board of CPR, Center for Performance Research, and I feel like that's one of the spaces in New York that really sticks to the mission of being artist driven, which is why we do like to do the project there.
Fantastic. And can you tell us a little bit more about, so who is in your current crew? Sidra Dance New York. I mean, now congratulations also to have any sort of company model for 20 plus years, and continuing to make. What does a crew look like? How many dancers, cast members? How often do you typically get to make work on your own company?
What's really beautiful now post pandemic is that I've been gifted this 3-year residency at the Gibney Dance Center. It was something I did not expect. It came as a gift and a surprise late last year, and we were already kind of celebrating our 20-year anniversary. I needed out of the pandemic for kind of functional reasons. We put together this repertory show because a presenter in Cincinnati, actually, Mutual Dance Theater with the Aronoff Theater was inviting us to come out, but we were not in rehearsal very much during the pandemic. So out of functionality, I just decided to bring together these works from the past 20 years, solos, duets, small group pieces. And we ended up bringing that piece to Mutual Dance Theater in Cincinnati in 2022. So that piece already existed. And then Gina Gibney at the same time was sort of looking at me, along with Nigel Campbell, her center director, to be an artist in residence. And they decided to present this retrospective work to celebrate us this past fall. So I actually had 8 dancers involved in that. It was this beautiful tapestry of actually existing dancers that were sort of in the company. And I actually brought in a few from the past, which was really interesting. I feel like the company has become a much more flexible space to engage with artists that are entrenched in the philosophy of the company, but shifting, with each project. And it was sort of a beautiful thing to be able to like integrate dancers from all parts of my life. Those that were like really working in the company, and some from even 10 years ago. So I was really proud of the show. It really felt like this is us.
That's
Alongside,
good.
yeah, alongside of the show, we actually did this retrospective gallery. So the audience moved through this gallery of ephemera, like costumes and objects and photographs from the past, and then moved into upstairs Studio C where the show happened. And our next project with Gibney is actually a new piece that will take place in 24. So we have a residency this whole year, and then we'll be doing a new piece with Creative Capital with composer Emmanuel Wilkins. So lots of stuff coming up in the future, and keeping this kind of small boutique model. I think it also is a great model to tour with, and to kind of leverage partnerships within community to allow the dancers to be able to take on teaching roles. And it's still a very intimate structure that I'm trying to cultivate in the company model.
And that's just one of the things amid all the different teaching that you do. And I also would be remiss not to acknowledge you are the first Black female choreographer for New York City Ballet, yet a whole other paradigm and environment to work in. What was it like to make dance in that structure?
When we think about structure, I was actually thinking about it today in rehearsal with GroundWorks. I've been this past few years specifically, I think something really like coalesced and cohered from maybe the 20 years of working, or the shifts in the industry or the ecology of how I was thinking, or just leaning in to of the things
Mhm.
that were really always comfortable for me in making is the disparity of projects I get to work on is like really thrilling. I think having a company that's very nuclear and kind of, developing the language and almost like letting it unfurl out into different institutions, and then the commission work that I do allows me to work in different frameworks, scale, and it keeps the curiosity really alive. It also helps stretch me as a maker. Like with GroundWorks, I feel like as I'm in the process now, I'm thinking a lot about kind of the intimate structure of the theater and how can I as a director respond to that. We have the content and the material, but I feel like now I'm in a directorial mode and really like asking the dancers to consider proportion and spatiality in a different way. And I feel like my language is clearer around those things, whereas when I first
Mm.
started out as a choreographer, I just happened to be doing shows on street corners or in galleries. It was just kind of happening. Now I feel like there's a lot of intentionality around scale. I just was a movement advisor on an opera project that opened in San Francisco at Z Space, and
Mhm.
that was wildly different. Working under a director, Slovenian director Carmina Selek, and what she needed and the scale of things, and actually the movement was quite tiny, but the scale of the piece was huge. Um, and working with City Ballet, the consideration of scale was like right at the outset with the costumes
Mhm.
of Christopher John Rogers, incredible black designer, lots of color and size and form. And I almost sort of felt like the dance just had to respond to that first, that it was going to be
Mm.
sculptures on stage, and how do I facilitate move the imagery along and through the piece with dance vocabulary, collaborate with the ballet lexicon with my ideas, and then thinking about in that huge space. It really is huge when you walk in. And I remember
Mhm.
seeing, when I got the commission, I actually went to see the company. I hadn't seen them in many years, since I was probably in high school or college. And
Yeah.
I remember seeing them. I remember seeing them growing up, and it was influential. I went to Dance Theater Harlem, so there's an intersection there. But when I saw the show and thinking about, I'm going to be on that stage, like I have to fill the stage up. It's got to be in a different kind of proportion. Um, so I really loved the challenge. I loved meeting the challenge. There was a lot of integrated work actually that happens behind the scenes in the costume room with Mark Happel, who's the costume supervisor. And we were always talking about scale and frame. And then with Mark Stanley, the lighting designer, it was, the things that you might do in a modern contemporary space, like things have to be more ample and amplified, while still kind of adhering to the aesthetics of the work. So there were fun things that happened, like I got to light up Balanchine's jewels in the theater. Like they're just really beautiful, like notes and things that you can do when things can fly in and out of a theater. That was just like spectacular. I had a really great time with the piece and with the dancers.
Awesome. It's so fascinating to hear you talk about scale, because I'm reminded of the first time we got to meet was at a small theater, 171 seat theater in San Francisco, ODC Theater, and you were partnering with Levy Dance at the time. And if I recall, it was like both Levy Dance dancers and Sidra Bell Dance New York dancers. And there was that spirit of play, but it's such an intimate space that the audience, it might as well like be on stage with you, especially
Hmm.
relative to something like Lincoln Center.
Hmm.
um, and I remember the lights also inside of that, and so I wouldn't have been able to articulate it, but I think yes, you've always played with scale,
That was, I
and
mean,
have
I'm
found.
still doing that same thing that I was doing at ODC Theater with you. I mean, that particular residency with Levy Dance was critical. I think at that particular juncture, I think I was like 10 years into my career.
Mhm.
And then Levy offered the opportunity to kind of be, he was mentoring me. We were kind of at the same place, but he had much more infrastructure on his company. And to be at ODC Theater, we had that technical residency with the Rainin
Mhm.
Foundation. And to be able to be in a space and literally have everything be about the tech alone, and the dance was kind of secondary and almost like a palette to work with. But having crew being able to take things up and down and move lights, and let's try this and let's see how this lights the body and what happens if we bring projection in here. That was really important. I think I've carried that with me. But we don't get those opportunities often. So I've savored those moments where I've been really able to play with the theater and what it does. And I'm still doing some of those ideas, actually, a lot of those existing ideas from the pieces I made on Levy and my company. I still bring
Yeah.
those ideas in, whether it's like lowering the truss or having fluorescence or, and also isolating
That,
ideas.
I mean, I want to describe for people, especially if they've never been in a technical residency, it would be like if you went into someone's house and they said, well, I just decided to make the living room the dining room and the dining room the living room. Like you come into a house and it's organized a certain way, but it's not all a foregone conclusion. And that's what I really felt you explored. You were like, what if we move all the lights to the front of the stage? What if we do all of this over here? Just to be able to see it. I'm, delighted that it still sticks with you.
Oh, yeah.
What sticks with me, and I watched some of your more recent footage as well, knowing that we were going to get to see each other again. And what is also still the same is this way of movement that almost has like an inherent tension. Sometimes pulling, dancers pulling themselves into knots that you're like, how did their body do that? But yet they also seem at ease. And the best description I can come up with it is it's almost never a fixed entity. It's like liquid metal that kind of like one of those toys that would run through your fingers, or as you flip it over, it constantly moves. It's never still. And I'm curious, if one that resonates, but also how would you, care to describe your movement aesthetic?
I'm learning so much about movement right now. I've kind of been moving more myself, which has been really great to rediscover. Even performing a little here and there, improvising on my own. And I feel like the body just continues to be like this unveiling process for me.
Mm.
And in that way, I think like I'm always in my movement research and vocabulary, like it feels like I'm always in between states, but working even more so now with like the sort of space between stillness and motion, which what do we even call that? There's no name for that. Um, and coaching the dancers to feel that like anticipation. I think anticipation is really important, whether it's
Mm.
like getting to an extreme or being closer to like hibernation or meditation even. So that's just something, it continues to be curious. I was thinking about it today, like even in warming up, like every time I'm guided in a practice or I hear a new idea about like how to describe something that I've done my entire life, it always feels just so enlightening and like a discovery. And that's something I
Mm.
like the dancers to feel like it's not just happening robotically. It's like you're actually feeling and discovering it in real time, which I think causes it to be this sort of theatrical hyper world because it's
Mm-hmm.
happening. Like it's always happening. It's always live in the body, and I think that kind of comes through in the performance. There's a
Mm.
tenuousness to it that
Yeah.
I'm still captivated by that tenuousness and in motion, if not more so than ever before.
It's well, there's an aliveness, tenuousness. I love words, but it makes me think of different training, with no shade, but some aesthetics and forms are about hitting your marks, hitting a number of turns, how high you can kick your leg, jumping certain high or otherwise. And yours, it's like it's constantly living in that liminal space of aliveness and finding that. And it definitely does, crescendo and escalate and ebb and flow. But it's not as staccato. It has more of a sense of constant breathing too. It's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to be aware of that also as a viewer
Mm-hmm.
too, and how conditioned we are as dance audiences, to applaud for 32 fouettes. But then how do we also stay present when dancers are giving us so much in your work in that way?
It's heart rate too. It's heart. I think when I'm accumulating ideas, which is actually where I am with the groundworks right now, like I'm kind of accumulating. It feels like we're in this like almost static place right now. And it's like, how do these ideas accumulate and where does, I was talking to the dancers today about pitch. Like that's usually a word you would use for music. I mean, you might use it in dance, but it's not as used in that way. And it's like reset the pitch, like sort of feeling like where the vibrational points can be and how do you export that and translate that, but then also feel it. Like there's so much going on in a three-dimensional way for them. I think the important thing is to feel that it's three-dimensional, that it's not just a flattened experience, which then maybe affects the audience in a way that's nonverbal or it's not as named, but it's important. It's just as important as something that feels performative and like sort of carved out, something that we understand. Like think it's okay not to understand everything that happens to you.
Yeah, that's why, especially inside of contemporary dance, just like contemporary art and sort of leaving what's unsaid as well, to stay present. I'm curious, with so many teaching opportunities, commissioning opportunities, as well as when you are hiring your own dancers, like what do you look for in dancers, in partners? What makes you say yes?
It's always so different. I've gone through, when I met you, I was sort of in the middle, in the 20-year arc, if you want to say that. But since then, I've had maybe 2.5 companies, let's say, like 2.5 cycles of dancers turning over and having to like redevelop that kind of cult of personality that is so important to my work and like the nuclear feeling that it has. And it's a lot of training in the beginning. Even when a dancer gets into the company, I have to almost sort of take them through durational exercises and warm-ups and improvisations to sort of strip away. There's a lot of, I think, shedding that happens in the first year being a company dancer. Um, they've all been so different. Like if I was to say, this is the archetype, it's almost impossible. I almost think like what becomes critical is forming the group. So
The
I feel like
sum
they're
of the
different.
whole.
Yeah, I feel like I've been looking at like the work of Picasso, like there's like the blue period, and like I feel like I've gone through a lot of those stages. A few years ago it was I called them worms. Like 5 years ago, I had a piece called Monster Outside, and they were just very like um, curious and strange even, and they were super eclectic, endless curiosity, and it felt like that group, which was kind of after the group that you met, felt like I was almost restarting into my like infancy as a maker, and they were sort of in that range too. Like we were in this kind of discovery period, and so they were the worms, and now it feels like with this last kind of period I've been much more focused on like stillness and even pedagogy to some extent, and kind of like what are the boundaries and limits. And so the dancers I'm working with now feel very I feel like everything's like their bones are just, it's just like you just see their bones moving around. And I think that's because I'm just hyper aware of like what I'm doing on a technical level with my material, and the coaching is amplified. So yeah, they just feel like periods. I think as I audition new dancers, I'm always looking at like what I need, who's there, what can the kind of what does the kinesphere feel like? What is their intellect like? Like, what are they bringing in? Where are they at? There's a lot of conversation around like, where are you at in your life and how can we be in conversation with each other? Because it truly is a collaboration. There's a lot of taking. I take a lot of material from the dancers and a lot of ideas. And so I think it has to be timing as well. Like there's only so much that you can look at the technique of the body because so many dancers have incredible technique, especially now as the field has advanced. Like there's almost an endless amount of possibilities dancers can do. But I think for me, there's something in the essence and the spirit and the yeah, just where they are and what they're thinking about, and is that something I want to think about or ponder, and so it's there's a lot of timing that's in place, but I think that in general I'm curious about motion still. Like there's a lot of motion still happening in the work. So how do we
Mhm.
facilitate that? There's no archetype for that, but just a curiosity in the body.
Yeah. Well, and to talk about your work with GroundWorks a little bit more, and you've mentioned it some this evening, but I'm curious, like, where did you start? You've talked also in the past about responding to costumes or music and space as an idea. This work will be performed in two different spaces, one in Akron, one in Cleveland. Where did you begin when you stepped into the GroundWorks environment?
Well, it's actually nice even thinking about my own company, because coming here felt like a very familiar environment, and that it's 5 dancers, which is a similar scale, endless possibilities. Like they feel like I can almost utter something and they have 1,000 ideas of where that motion and movement can take
Mm,
them. Very open, and the kind of dancer that I would look for, like in that same kind of train of thought. Like there's something really curious about the dancers, something that David cultivates. I can feel it. And then now getting to know David more, there's something quietly like instituted in the space of like curiosity and mutuality, that I just feel from them. Um,
mhm,
I did kind of come in with a blank canvas for a lot of reasons. I'm in a heavy touring period on my own, so I've just come from several different projects. And so I felt when I got here, I was just exhausted, and which was kind of a nice state to start with these dancers, because they were very open, and I just taught a class to start, and we just started to work shape and movement, which is sort of where I always work, is shape and out. And I was kind of debating about music. In recent works, I've been working with even orchestra and voice and the opera I mentioned. So it was kind of nice to just be back in my music library and searching for unique pieces. And um, as I was going, I bookmarked things that felt sonically interesting. And I think we're getting there. I'm still in the process of choosing. Like even
mm,
today, I rearranged everything in the center piece. So there's all like, it's haywire again. And I changed one of the songs and put in other structural elements. So we're kind of in the middle. But I think what's been great is feeling like I can do that. Like there's time to do that. I don't need to decide. Um, and there's no pressure. I haven't felt any pressure to have a finished product by tomorrow.
mhm,
It feels like there's still time to rearrange and consider, and the spaces too. I'm responding to the intimacy of those two spaces, which also feel like really comfortable frameworks for me in relationship to like work that I've done in New York and Black Box. And so it's fun to be in that space again, of
mhm.
kind of a little bit of a tinier theatrical chamber-like group of dancers and endless possibilities. I've been talking to the dancers about abundance within a small frame, and
Mm,
that feels thematically very important to what they're doing in their bodies and also the structure of the piece.
mm. Do you have a title yet, or how does that come about in your process?
The title's Temperance,
Temperance.
and using the secondary definition of it, because I realize there's a movement around temperance. I'm using it in the sense of like consideration and restraint. I love titling, I love language as you do. And I think for me, titles are containers. Sometimes they come really early, like day one. I always have my journal next to me. And journaling is sort of a constant process within, whether it's like something I say and I need to like kind of write it down, or something I want to think about or question. And so that kind of came right early on. And since then, I've been kind of subtitling and kind of underlining that word with different ideas. And I think those may end up in the program. They often do. Like there's always kind of a language infrastructure the audience can follow and kind of consider. Um,
Mm,
so that's been fun. Just like bringing my writing out more, like
mhm,
having a writing practice, and thinking about how that can feed into performance work and also publishing. And I've just been writing more and like formalizing that process more, and having that fold out into how I present, propose, question. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's almost poetic then too, to understand how the words and any language would reveal itself. Um,
It's a process
I
of revealing, absolutely. It's like the
yeah.
peeling back that I was talking about in movement too. Like it feels like language, which you can never really name what's
Mhm.
happening in the body fully because it's three-dimensional and it's felt and it's embodied. But I do like to have a process parallel that can kind of export the ideas out, whether that's a sketch or a poem or something that allows for it to live in another space.
Mhm. It's I mean, the creative process is rarely ever linear. And as you build out or reveal these other spaces, it makes me think of also more and more boxes. So inside of all this, I'm also curious, how do you know when it's done, or at least done for now? Is this a place where you're given a box like, great, I need a 17-minute dance? Or do you just keep feeling and finding your way and revealing, and there's something intuitive? I think that's always a question, particularly for our younger dance makers or those coming, out of college that are like, I found this piece of music. This piece of music is 3 minutes and 31 seconds. My dance is 3 minutes and 31 seconds. So I'm just kind of curious how you also are exploring that scale, in terms of time.
It's always a negotiation. I think there's something interesting in the structure of my career too, because I do have limits and deadlines and lots of deadlines
Yeah.
in so many ways, can almost seem insurmountable. But I think one way that's kind of helped me negotiate with those kind of boundaries is to open up within the boundary. So time, for instance, is a pretty clear one. I have 3 weeks. There's kind of, a sketch of what is asked of me. Like I have a lot of things that are asked of me to do, but within that, how can I feel rich and comfortable and curious? And how can a day feel like 1,000 days?
Mhm.
So I feel like there's something about feeling that boundary of time, or, what's necessary, but also like being present enough that the curiosity can still exist within that structure. And trusting that something will happen. Is it ever done? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
There are versions. I think for me, especially with my commission work, I do often have to leave it. But for me, it's another version inside of a version that, for me personally, will appear, whether it's like on stage or part of like how I'm thinking about process. And it's that same idea of like the continuous circle of like what can be reaped out of an experience and how that then folds into another experience. It may not look the same
Mhm.
or even be recognizable as itself, but it exists. And I think that's part of like being willing to fail,
Mhm.
being willing to fail on stage, whatever that means. I've had works that have felt like either unfinished or not received well, or I may be gnawing at an idea that just feels like we didn't get there somehow, but somehow those things will manifest elsewhere. So
Mm.
it's sort of futuring constantly, and trusting that the process was necessary. Um, and I really have felt that. I think I have a lot of hindsight in that now, to be able to like guide my mentees in that process, that this
Mhm.
isn't the only time. This isn't the last time. There's always more. Whether it looks like you thought it would or not is another story, but there's always more inside of it.
Mm.
Um, and I have manifests of that, like where a piece feels like it's on the way, but it's not quite there. I may revisit it. I may extract. I may
You got
revise.
to, yeah, for your
So
retrospective. Yeah.
yeah, there's so many. I mean, even that process, it felt like a brand new piece. Yet there was like a precision too. Like it was interesting. It was really interesting at this stage, doing something like that, because I still feel like I have a lot of years left. So to like,
Totally. Yeah.
but to actually like be in a space where I had a lot of precision with what the works were kind of about, but then to be able to
Mm.
coach new dancers into it was super interesting. A lot of it was like through like the archival, like being able to trace materials and like bring them in, have the dancers explore and have it be their own, but also create a boundary. So it's all of these kind of liminal things. Again, it's like it's neither this or that, it's somewhere in between. And that's where things become new again.
Mm. That I have one last question, and, and I recognizing and respecting that you are in the process. You are still figuring out and making and burnishing and peeling back and revealing. But is there anything else that you'd like to share about temperance or offer as a sort of provocation or prompt to what you hope audiences will get out of the experience?
I don't know. There's a lot of work for me in this piece around the idea of like the abundance within like a limited scale, and meaning that in like what the dancers are doing, I think is really finite and beautiful, and just the provocation to like peer in a little bit more. I think
Mhm.
that's what I'm asking the dancers to do, and I know that it's really challenging because they're so technically virtuosic. Like there's so much they can do, but to sort of create this really concise world, and to have them like peer into themselves more. I think that would be a provocation for the audience to really like lean into the piece,
Mhm. Mhm.
whether that's through the lensing or the listening. I think there's always a lot to like see and hear in my work. Repeated viewings are always great too because it's so detailed. That I just hope audiences will want to get curious about it and enjoy GroundWorks. I think Cleveland's been really great. It does remind me a lot of cities that I love, like Pittsburgh and San Francisco. There's a lot of like raw energy here that I think
Mm.
really is reflected in the GroundWorks ethos and how they work with community. And yeah, there's something really raw and beautiful about what I've experienced here.
Mhm. Yes. I love that, and I loved also the provocation to lean in more and repeat viewings. That is one of the guilty, not so guilty pleasures, I think, in my field, in my work, that I get to see things more than once because
Hmm.
dance happens in real time. You're not going to catch everything the first time
Hmm.
around.
Hmm.
And that also tees it up. How amazing that you can see the world premiere of Temperance, because GroundWorks will be performing it 4 times in Northeast Ohio. And that includes the Spring Performance Series, April 14th through 15th at the Night Stage at Akron Civic Theater, as well as April 21st through 22nd at the Latinus Black Box Theater at the Pivot Center for Art, Dance, and Expression in Cleveland, Ohio. And so go to groundworksdance.org/spring 2023 for more ticket information. Sidra, I'm so glad we got to reconnect. That's another
Me
kudos to David
too.
for bringing us
Thank
together.
you. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Absolutely. Yes. And thank you for being so generous with your work and your process tonight. I can't wait to check out the show.
Thank you.
Bye.